Let's move on to the subject, the small subject of China, because we have with us another expert, and I'm delighted that Charlie Parton agreed to be with us tonight. And I won't go through his bio. You've seen in great detail over the months his considerable experience in that field. On our behalf, on the government's behalf, spent many years in China, Hong Kong, and so on, and that will emerge in the course of the discussion. He has got a particular story to talk about tonight in relation to technology, but he has said to me over the meal that he'd be very happy to take wider questions if you feel encouraged to put those to us in the usual way. So without further ado, please welcome Charlie Parton.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Bill. I approach this talk with considerable trepidation in view of this audience. We decided on a title which I think is slightly melodramatic, really. Can China conquer the world through technology? Let me just parse that title a little bit. When I talk about China, can China? When I say the words China, I mean the Chinese Communist Party, unless I'm talking about geography or something very particular. Because, as Xi Jinping tells us, the Chinese Communist Party rules everything, and we should always believe what Xi Jinping says. The other thing I would say in talking about the Chinese Communist Party is that people always say it's a black box. Well, that's true when it comes to the personnel decisions, who's up, who's down. I don't think it is in any way a black box when it comes to policy. They're actually, in my view, far more open about what they're going to do and what they're doing than our own government, certainly with our own government's policy towards China. So that's, can China conquer the world? Well, I don't mean militarily or establish an empire or anything like that. I mean what Xi Jinping means when he talks about attaining the dominant position. And I'll come throughout this talk to give you an idea of what exactly he does mean by that. That was the phrase he used in his first Politburo meeting back in January 2013. And then through technology. Well, I mean this in the widest sense. I'm certainly not a technologist by training. I'm a classicist and then a sinologist. But this is a technological world. And I think we need to look at this both in terms of invention, innovation, which is different, right through the process of industrialization, and indeed the other uses of technology, and I'll come to those. So things like quantum and AI, mammothly important. I won't and probably can't go into detail on too much on those, but I think the threat is far wider than those. But I will look at the 10 ways that China uses to attain this, or is trying to attain this position, this dominant position. And I would argue that of the 10 methods that it uses, at least 7, if not more, have a very close connection with technology. So what do I mean then by conquer the world? Well, the Chinese Communist Party talks about the 2 centennial goals. The first one has already passed, 2021, to become a moderately prosperous nation by the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. Tick. The second centennial goal says that by 2049, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, they will build a modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, and harmonious. And they also talk about the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Let me translate that into plain English from party speak. And what it means is that the Chinese Communist Party in China will replace the United States as the #1 superpower by the mid-century. And it will so change global governance and the value systems as to better align with its own value systems and with its own interests, because it sees the current world as aligned with America and the West's interests. And another phrase that you come across every day if you spend your life buried in Chinese documents and speeches and commentaries, as I do, what one famous Chinese sinologist referred to as chewing rhinoceros sausages. It's hard work. On another occasion, he talked about eating sawdust. It is true, but there's a lot in it. And one of the phrases that comes up an awful lot is struggle against hostile forces. And those two terms, struggle, hostile forces, are everywhere. This is, in the view of the Chinese Communist Party, a war. They call it a struggle. War's a wrong word. Cold War is a wrong word. But struggle is a very strong word. Is that a fair translation? Well, you judge, because here are a few quotations from Xi Jinping. Don't take my word for it. Take China and some of the other ministers. And I said that Xi Jinping talked in his first Politburo speech about attaining the dominant position. But there's plenty of other pronouncements along those sorts of lines, and also about struggle. Here's one from document number 9. It was a leaked document, secret party document. And it talks about Western anti-China forces will continue to point the spearhead of westernizing, splitting, and color revolutions at China. So that was 2013. Then in 2021, the Minister of State Security said, international struggles are becoming increasingly fierce, and system confrontation has become a prominent feature of the game between major powers. The US suppression of China is a major threat, but our struggle is both a skirmish and a protracted war. Here's Xi Jinping at the 6th plenum in 2021. Various hostile forces will never allow us to realize the great rejuvenation of China smoothly. Again, here's the head of one of the major ideological departments. The struggle between the two social systems and two ideologies will also be long-term, complex, arduous, and severe. The strategic contest between China and the United States is bound to last for a long period of time, for which we must be fully prepared ideologically and work. And then here's another one in an important document to be read by all Chinese party members. This comes from the Central Propaganda Department and the National Security Commission. Hostile forces persistently seek to foment a color revolution within our state, vainly attempting to subvert the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party and the socialist institutions of our state. On the international stage, Western hostile forces have not ceased their ideological infiltration of our country, not even for a moment. Now, in this struggle against hostile foreign forces, that's you and me, science and technology is the main battleground. And again, don't take my word for it, take the Chinese Communist Party's word for it. Here are a couple of statements. The scientific and technological revolution and the contest between major powers are intertwined. The high-tech field has become the forefront and main battlefield of international competition. The competition between countries is a competition of strength. What is crucial is the competition of scientific and technological innovation capabilities. The underlying contest is about whose system is superior. So that was the Minister of State and Science and Technology. Here's a quotation from a director of one of China's biggest scientific companies, who used to be a very, very senior member of the Ministry of Commerce, I think. The core of the US-China rivalry is the technology war. Many people talk about financial and trade wars, but the deadliest battle is the technology war. The technology war will ultimately determine the fate of both sides. Whether the US can defeat China or whether China can rise from adversity will depend on the technology war. I also believe that the technology war is not an encounter, a battle, but protracted. And just one final quotation, and I'll try and then to keep them to a minimum. Core technology is an important weapon for the country. Only by holding key core technologies in our hands can we fundamentally guarantee national economic security, national defense security, and other security. And this idea of self-reliance, not just in technology, but over all fields, is a very, very strong one with the Chinese Communist Party. So, in sum, what does the Chinese Communist Party want? It's not seeking empire or the sorts of structures that perhaps America has set up. It's basically trying to revive the Tianxia concept. Tianxia is an old Chinese concept. It literally means everything under heaven. But if I were to explain it, it means that what the party is aiming for is a world in which China is the center of the world, as it always was and should be. Secondly, that global governance, norms, and values should be set by and be in line with those of the Chinese Communist Party. Thirdly, deference to China is the watchword. It's not empire or hegemony. But let's not forget that historically, the appetite grows with eating. If those of you who are classicists may have looked at the 5th century BC and the Athenian Empire, which started off as Athens primus inter pares and ended up, frankly, with a coercion of the weak. Or indeed the British Empire, which started really not through any defined plan, but organically through a need to protect trade. Later things took on a more geopolitical and perhaps empire-like reasoning. And the final point that I would make about this and China's concept is that China is exporting elements of its model. Not the entire system, because no other country could possibly have the culture and the political culture and the Chinese Communist Party, a structure like that. That is not what it's doing in the way that perhaps the Soviet Union was trying to do during the Cold War, but it is exporting elements of that system. And Xi Jinping is very clear about that. This is what he said to the Central Party School in February 2023. Chinese-style modernization provides a brand new style of modernization for the whole world. It transcends the theory and practice of Western-style modernization and provides a brand new choice for the vast number of developing countries. So that's what they're aiming for. That's the form of dominance. I think I would identify 12 methods by which they're doing that. The first is a very clear conception of a contest between economic systems, their economic system and ours. Secondly, economic sticks and carrots. If you're with us, says the Chinese Communist Party, you get the benefits of trade and investment. And if you're against us, forget it. And simply greatly exaggerated by many of our governments in particular. Thirdly, external propaganda. They put a massive amount of effort into that. Truly massive. Fourthly, the activities of the United Front Work Department and the intelligence services, the Ministry of State Security and Military Intelligence, in a spectrum from influence, well, we all do that, we call it public diplomacy, through interference, which we say we don't do, right up to espionage and hacking, which we do actually, but not on the scale on which they do. Fifthly, military build-up and threats. Sixthly, changing global governance and imposing their standards, particularly technical standards, very important for that sort of, the power that gives. Seventhly, co-opting the global south. And then the three that I will probably concentrate on more, and I think probably the most important, dominating the new science and technologies and creating dependencies, partly by dominating those sciences, but also by dominating the new industries that depend from them, and data, whether that's aggregated, vast amounts aggregated into powerful tools, or the use of data to get precision instruments, and I'll come back to that, but studying you and getting everything that they want to know about the Vice-Chancellor, which could be a powerful tool. Now, I think there's a science and technology element to pretty much all of those. I mean, I'll just give you a few quick examples, but take external propaganda. We've all heard about the problems of the algorithms of TikTok and Weibo and other platforms. The technology is damn good, and it is actually being very useful to them. If you look at the United Front Work Department and the intelligence, there's been a detailed program since the 1950s for the obtaining of science and technical information and data and know-how. It's set out in 5-year plans and yearly plans what they're going to get hold of. think about global standards and the setting of those and the power that gives. Co-opting the global south. I mean, we see Huawei setting up all the telecommunication systems in many of these countries. The buying in of Chinese security equipment. All these things come with values built in as well. And let's also be clear that the Chinese harvest vast amounts of data through those systems in the global south, and if we let them here too. So now let me look a little bit more about those three that I talked about: dominating the new science and technologies, the dependencies, and the data. Here are, what are the objectives of Xi Jinping in this? And I'll just use his words. These are themes that he uses all the time. He talks about building a world science and technology superpower. He talks about achieving a high-level technological self-reliance and self-strengthening. And he talks about solidly promoting the deep integration of science and technological innovation and of industrial innovation to help develop new quality productive forces. That's a sort of set phrase. In essence, it means the harnessing of new technologies in order to raise the total production factor. Sorry, I got that phrase on TPF. These themes, these objectives appear regularly in his speeches, documents, and over the last decade. Here's what he said, for instance, in May 28th, 2018. Self-reliance is the foundation of the Chinese nation to strive and stand on its own among the nations of the world, and independent innovation is the only way for us to scale the world's technological peaks. When he was talking in June 24 to the National Science and Technology Conference, he said, at the same time, the world is undergoing changes unseen in a century that are accelerating, with technological revolution and great power competition intertwined, making high technology fields the forefront and main battlefield of international competition, profoundly reshaping the global order and development pattern. 2 years later, same conference, Ding Xuexiang, who's one of the top 7 members of the party in the Politburo Standing Committee, he again covered all those 3 themes that I talked about, adding that the deeper the scientific and technological revolution and industrial transformation develop, the more it's necessary to strive to seize the commanding heights of international competition and firmly grasp the initiative in scientific and technological competition. Again, this came up in the first Politburo study session. They have about 10 times a year, not only a Politburo meeting, but Xi Jinping calls a study session, and they take a particular topic. The first one of this year was on the future of the commanding heights of science and technology, which just shows you how important it is. And then if you look at the 15th five-year plan, which will be formally come out in March, but we've seen the recommendations for it, the draft of it. The number 1 priority is strengthening the manufacturing base by upgrading traditional industries, which includes fostering industries of the future and extensively applying new technologies. And then there's, as the second priority, our old friend achieving greater reliance, self-reliance and strength in science and technology. Let's not be in any doubt that that is what the aim is, and the funding is big for this. Back in '86, the National Science Foundation of China, which does a lot of the money work for this, its budget was equated to about $11.5 million in '86. In 2025, it's $5.7 billion. So the mathematicians amongst you will already realize that's about 500 times greater. And of course, that's not the only source of funding. In SFC, there's the private sector, there's state-owned enterprises, there's some of the local governments, etc. Big effort too to attract talent to China, big salaries, and an extensive linking of the educational system and immigration of global talent to underpin that. And Xi Jinping will always talk about international cooperation and the importance thereof. It does tend, I have to say, to be a one-way valve. which is a shame because some of China's technology now is way ahead. It's excellent. Next question is, well, how good is China at innovating? In a sense, how fearful should we be? And some years ago, 10, 15 years ago, you'd hear people saying, well, of course, China can't really innovate. The system prevents it. And you think, really? Well, TikTok, Alibaba, Weibo, DeepSeek, not too bad. And even if they're no good, and there's a big difference, of course, between invention and innovation, and even if they're not as good as Xi Jinping would like at invention, and I think they're not bad, actually, well, if you've got massive programs to buy in inventions, steal them, spy on them, form joint ventures and get them handed over, get foreign universities to do some of the research for you, well, maybe you don't need to be that good at invention. But one thing they are extremely good at is the innovation in incremental advances, taking that basic position and then moving it forward, at industrializing it, at introducing quickly, very quickly, these sorts of innovations into industrial production lines. I mean, just to give you one example, there was a lot of talk 10, 15 years ago about energy and the importance of Xinjiang and Tibet, a lot of sun, a lot of water. And you think, yeah, well, that's fine, but all the industry's over there and Tibet's and Xinjiang's over there. Well, look what they've done in ultra-high voltage cables and transmission. It's very, very impressive. And I think it's not an exaggeration to say that in this competition, who will win? Maybe the countries with the best and the cheapest and the most abundant energy. Because without that, how are you going to power your data centers? Many of which they're going to put up in Tibet, incidentally, because it's cold up there. So, yes, there are weak areas. The more advanced semiconductors, civil aviation planes, for instance, engines. But let's not forget also that China produces somewhere in the region of 4 to 5 million STEM graduates a year. That's an awful lot of trained power. One other thing that I put down here is, because I said dependencies as number 9, China is through its policies of self-reliance, self-sufficiency, very keen to avoid any of those dependencies in science and technology, particularly on the US and the West. Because they see, as I said at the beginning with the second centennial goal, that the aim of the US is to repress and contain China. May not be wrong. The reverse of that coin, of course, is that they're very keen to extend those dependencies so that we are dependent on them. And they will use those dependencies. We've seen it with rare earths. There are dependencies on legacy chips. There's been a problem there. We have many dependencies on biopharma is another one, cellular modules another. These don't need to be cutting-edge technology, as long as, but they are vital. If they're vital to the way our technological world works, that gives immense power. So they're very keen to create those dependencies. Actually, I'd like to give you an example of that, about this aggressive use of the domination of new technologies in the present and into the future. And I always sort of say that, the 4 technologies that immediately come to mind as the most crucial over the next few years are AI, quantum, semiconductors, and cellular modules. And I'm going to talk about cellular IoT modules. It's the one that people don't really focus on, and yet I would argue it's probably of all those, well, it's certainly up there. What is a cellular IoT module? It's a thing that's about the size of a credit card, a bit thicker. It contains an antenna, processors, memory, an eSIM, and its job is it's the connectivity, it's the gateway to any modern system and devices. And they're everywhere now, from our homes right through to the most enormous production lines, communication systems, logistics, you name it. And so all systems have to be updated, the software has to be updated. That goes through the cellular module. The cellular module itself has to be updated, its firmware, and so there will be firmware over-the-air updates. And the Chinese are very keen to establish a monopoly in this industry. If they do, what happens? And by the way, I think they have around about 87% of the market at the moment. But let us suppose that they get a monopoly of this. Then at that stage, three threats develop. One is dependency. We are totally dependent on cellular modules for our economy, our way of life. If the supply of those is curtailed, and we've seen them do it with rare earths, well, good luck to your economy. That is a very powerful weapon. And so, UK, we don't like your policy on Taiwan or Hong Kong or this particular economic deal. I think you better think about it. Of course, they don't have to say that, and they probably wouldn't. They simply say, well, there's been a problem and there's a delay and whatever. These things have to be updated. If those updates are coming from China into Chinese cellular modules, because they've now got the technology, they've got the monopoly, how clear are we that within those updates there is not malware? Because in essence, what we're doing is saying, we give you the possibility of turning us off, or perhaps just degrading us, making our economy work less efficiently, if that suits your purposes. But at a time of heightened tension or war, why fight if you can turn America or Britain off? And finally, data, massive amounts of data go through cellular modules. And if that data ends up in the hands of the Chinese, which it could, if they control the cellular modules, what can they do with it? We've already seen this. For instance, 2022 it was, December, there was a report in one newspaper about data emanating from it said from a government car to China. The security services had stripped it down and seen that through the eSIM, by which they meant the cellular module, data was emanating to China. That was the Prime Minister's car, incidentally. That wasn't reported, but it was. And we've seen, the MOD ban Chinese cars from BYD cars and other Chinese cars from the near military bases, as the Chinese do. They don't let Tesla anywhere near any sensitive thing for very good reasons, because those cars have got very good cameras capable of facial recognition, etc., etc. All the not just the audio, the visuals, but the audio can go back to the car company or through the cellular module to China. So, nearing the end, another few minutes. People always promise that, and they never do. How successfully is China advancing on this course towards domination through science and technology? Well, I think there are two sides to this, and one of it's what are we doing, and the other is what are they doing. Let's start with what we're doing, because we need fully to digest the nature of technology, the changing nature of technology. It's now in a way that it never was in all our everyday lives. The days when the most complicated technology in my house was a bicycle are well past. The definition of critical national infrastructure is widening by the day. Would we say that vehicles were critical national infrastructure? I don't think we would have done 20 years ago. They are now. If you stall them all, turn them off, good luck with your economy. If you deliberately crash 10, 20 around London, you could block London. So I think that definition is widening. And the other thing about technology is that the distinction between military uses and civilian uses is eroding. And exhibit number 1, drones, started off as perfectly harmless cameras. We now know what they do in war. So, questions. Are our universities and businesses, do they fully understand the threat of how China is getting inappropriate access to technology and using it in ways that we don't? Because we're used to, particularly in our universities, to the science develops by openness, by cooperation, by building on each other's ideas. And that was fine in the Cold War because we didn't cooperate with Russia. Everyone played by the same rules. Now we have an adversary, I use that word advisedly, that doesn't play by the rules and treats us as hostile foreign forces. So it's a different world. And are our governments clear-sighted enough about the nature of the threats? Are they preparing voters for the consequences of taking measures against those threats, increased costs? Have they got a coherent strategy such that our academia knows where the red lines are from our point of view, our businesses, Parliament? Have they put the structures in place to ensure that there is coherence in a strategy? And are our free and open governments, democracies, are they working closely enough together in a unified way? I spent 5 years working for the European Union in Beijing. As a Brit, to say that the European Union wasn't very united and we then went for Brexit is a little hypocritical. But the point is, they never were, and they still aren't, and we need to be badly. And I think the time for action is now. I mean, the UK government says security is our #1 priority. And that's a hard job, because on the one hand, you've got national security, you've got economic prosperity, you've got environmental objectives, and you've got to persuade the public and Parliament as well. Try reconciling all those. I don't envy people working in government now. But there are some immediate and very important decisions to be made. Here are two. Are we going to allow China into our wind energy? This is the debate current at the moment. Will we let Mingyang set up a factory? We excluded Huaneng from our nuclear energy. We excluded Huawei from our telecommunications. So are we going to let them into our wind? When, as I said, the dependencies, they could stop it, they could slow it down, the spare parts, the updates may be slow. That is all considerations that we have to take into account. Second issue, electric vehicles. Are we happy with those? Because there are immense security issues connected with those. I've discussed the fact that the MOD doesn't allow BYD vehicles anywhere near it. But it's a lot more than that. There's a difference between investment from, let's say, a German or a Korean or a Japanese company, which will invest in the UK, and it will make its decisions to expand, contract, close, whatever, based on commercial reasons. Chinese will do that, sure. But there's also the political reasons. If the party says do X or Y to put pressure on a country, that company has no choice. So you're doing that. But also, we export about 15% of our vehicles to America. America has just as a relatively recent connected vehicle rule. It says that by the end of 2026, you may not import a car into America which has Chinese software. And by the end of 2029, you can't import a vehicle that has Chinese hardware. So, are we going to allow BYD into our industries here and cut off the American export market? It's a big decision. And I have no evidence that ministers are actually, I hope they're debating it. I've not seen any sign that they are. So, yes, we need a strategy. We haven't got one. We need it. As far as I know, that was the whole point of the China audit, but nothing came of that. What about from the Chinese point of view? I mean, how are they doing? Well, or will they succeed in this objective of getting the dominant position? I mean, one absolute requirement for them getting where they are, with the help of science and technology or whatever, is a strong and sustainable economy. You can't be a superpower without that. And as I've already said, that requires cheap and abundant energy, and it requires very good science and technology. But it also requires an economic and social model that is indeed sustainable. And back in 2007, the Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao said that the Chinese economic model was unbalanced, uncoordinated, unstable, and unsustainable. And Xi Jinping repeated that in 2013 when he launched at the third plenum a massive series of reforms under 60 headings and about 380 reforms. we know the main problems that the Chinese economy faces: debt, demographics, water shortage, drastic water shortage, and a skills mismatch. I would also argue that the Chinese system, it's extremely difficult to rule by top-down such an enormous country and such an enormous economy without the help of four, in a sense, self-regulating or helping in the regulation of that task. One is an independent media. One is an independent law. A third is the power of civil society, the pressure of civil society. I mean, as an ex-government official, I can tell you it's not the government that comes up with the pressure on the government or the good ideas for solving it. It's civil society. Well, if you're suppressing that, you're not helping yourself. And finally, I would argue that political accountability is important. It doesn't have to be Westminster voting, it doesn't have to be Washington voting, but there has to be some form of a decent political accountability. Now, none of that is possible under the Chinese Communist Party, because once you start going down some of those economic reforms, you end up having to change political system. And that's a no-no, because that risks ending in the demise of the Communist Party. So Xi Jinping is betting that he can cut this Gordian knot using science and technology. He may be right, I don't know. But what I would say is that if we wish to preserve our own way of life, our own systems, our own values, then we're probably better assuming that he might be right, and therefore we need to plan accordingly. Some parting thoughts. Our Prime Minister says national security is our #1 priority. Well, I'd like to see that actually borne out in practice. He's right, it is. But where are the policies that are there to ensure it? Xi Jinping is very clear on this himself. I mean, he always talks about the two wings, development and national security. Let me mention the D word. If you're feeling a bit prim, it stands for de-risking. I think we should be honest and call it decoupling in risk areas. We don't want to decouple from China entirely. We want to trade and invest with China. We want to work with China where we can, where it doesn't affect our red lines, in science and technology, in medicine, maybe in how we control the AI risks, there are climate change. There are plenty of areas where we should be putting a lot of effort into working with China, providing they don't go against our own red lines and interests, but those need properly defining. But I'm afraid it does mean very considerable degrees of decoupling. The Chinese, of course, recognized this years ago. Back in 2015, but they've been working on it before, they launched the Made in China 2025 project, which does what it says on the tin. Make sure it's made in China and not abroad, i.e. decouple. Self-reliance, what they call dual circulation. All these policies have at the basis of them the need to avoid dependence on the West and therefore to decouple. So, yeah, I'm afraid the world will be poorer for it. That is the nature of confrontation. At its extreme, it's called war, and it beggars nations. Let's hope it doesn't get anywhere near there. But if we want to protect what we have and the way we are, then we're going to need to cut out much of the Chinese hardware and software, even though it will cost us more. I think that's a price worth paying. The alternative is to live under this Chinese concept of tianxia. And as Liu Xiaobo, who won the Nobel Prize and was martyred for his belief in Chinese freedom for the Chinese, as he said, do not ever believe that the Chinese Communist Party will behave differently abroad towards you than it behaves towards its own people. So that's a fairly pessimistic outlook. I think it certainly applies to the next 5 years. Looking forward beyond 5 years, I think we move from the realm of analysis into the realm of prophecy, and I wouldn't ever describe myself as a prophet. Maybe it's a bit pessimistic. Sometimes people accuse me of being Cassandra. I think Cassandra It's always got bad press. I mean, for God's sake, she was right. There were Trojans, there were Greeks inside that bloody horse, and Troy fell. So, as a pessimist, I say, let's hold to Gramsci, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. And for those of you in the audience who are more optimistic than me, I feel sorry for you. I mean, optimists must continually wake up thinking, it's not quite turned out as well as I thought. Whereas for we pessimists, it always turns out better than we ever expected. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's get underway with the Q&A, if you wouldn't mind taking your seats. And I have to say, you've overwhelmed me tonight. And that is obviously hats off to our guest, Charlie Parton, for stimulating all these questions. He's been quite provocative, hasn't he? So I'm going to start off with referring to your opening remarks, and it's about clarification, right? So Tim O'Malley says, the Chinese Communist Party is clearly Chinese, and it's clearly a party, dominated by a party, but to what extent is it communist? It's very authoritarian, but is that an attribute which is confined to communism alone? So you might want to talk about that, and also have in your head another word you used. I don't know how many times it came out. That was the word dominance. It came out quite a bit, didn't it? So Sean Kelly says, you've persuasively evidenced the Chinese objective of dominance. But his question is, why do they feel the need to do this? So communism and dominance. Would you like to set off along that track?
Yes. Now, I was asked, but Bill told me, keep the answers short. Chinese what party? Yes, well, I would say Stalinist is probably the best description of the system. The party in control of the state. And indeed, the dichotomy between the party and the state, which did exist, has shrunk as Xi Jinping has moved party control over most functions of the state. People say, well, is it still a Marxist party? Because that's a word that they use very much. Well, Xi Jinping would certainly say it's Marxist, but he would say it's a new type of Marxism. It's a Marxism for the 21st century, which is some of the old stuff, some of China's traditional culture, and of course, lots and lots of dollops of his stuff, which then is made into this wonderful thing called Xi Jinping thought. And I can't remember how many topics and books there are on Xi Jinping thought, on diplomacy, on economics, on God knows what. So I think, terms are elastic. What was Marxism in Marx's day is not Marxism now, but certainly they would regard themselves as Marxist, whereas I would say they're probably more Stalinist. Why do they feel the need to dominate? Well, why does any group in history see the need to dominate? I think, but one thing I think one should talk about in this context is what they call a century of humiliation. This is really strong. Every Chinese has had this drilled into them, that from 1840 and the Opium Wars up until the founding of the People's Republic, that 100 years, foreign powers came into China, ordered them around, almost colonialized, semi-colonialized parts, took over. We ran the customs service, for instance, and weakened China as they saw it. We were responsible for the weakness of China, which only the Chinese Communist Party has been able to restore. Now, I could go into an awful lot of detail as to why that narrative is not the whole story. But one of the ways that the party, our parties try to legitimize themselves through the ballot box, that's not open to the Chinese.
how do they legitimize themselves? Well, first of all, by economic prosperity for everybody, which is getting a little bit more difficult now as the economy turns down. But other elements of it, and one's very important, is making China great again, getting over the century of humiliation, recovering Chinese territories to what they should be and always were. Again, it's false history, but we got back Xinjiang, we got back Tibet, we got back Hong Kong, we got back Macau. We're going to get back Taiwan, and maybe one day we'll get back Arunachal Pradesh in India, South Tibet as we call it, and even, dare I whisper it, parts of Russia, which we lost in the Treaty of 1860, 62, I forget. So I think that's why it's a big thing. It's part of the legitimizing of the party.
Let's go on to what's quite a relatively small question in the expanse that you've covered, but obviously it's close to home. It's on our patch, and that's the embassy.
My God, there's a sheaf of papers.
Right, yeah, there's lots. So that does concern people, right? So I'll give you the flavour. Bob Winter, shall we regret allowing the Chinese to build their new embassy? And someone else, what danger does it raise? Ian Watson, was it a good idea to allow them to build over the financial cables of the City of London? Graham, essentially, super embassy, bad idea, question mark. And John Mottram, I think it's quite an interesting way of putting it, is the creation of a super Chinese embassy in London a security threat, a moral victory, a vanity project, or nothing to worry about? Off you go.
Have you noticed no newspaper can talk about the Chinese embassy? It's the super embassy or the mega embassy. I think there are 4 issues here. One is the size. It's very big, sure, but they are consolidating from 7 sites onto 1 site. It's the biggest in Europe, sure, but if you put all the Chinese diplomats in Berlin into one place, or Paris, or Rome, it'll probably be the same size. It's a lot bigger than ours, yes, but don't forget, they employ no Brits inside their embassy on security grounds. So from bottle washers up to the ambassador, they're all Chinese. So you're going to have a lot more people. And they live on campus, because they don't trust their own people. They want to keep an eye on them. So they've got to build a lot of flats. So it's going to be a big site, and there aren't that many big sites in relatively prestigious parts of London. So I can't get excited about the building. It's not buildings that spy or do all nasty things, interfere. It's people. And if we really wanted to keep tabs on that, we have the right, under the Vienna Convention, to limit the number of Chinese diplomats. And we could do that. I don't think we will, but we could. So size, forget it. The really big issue is the cables. And I think we have to trust GCHQ and the security service when they say that it isn't a problem or they can manage it. I mean, at the very end of the day, you could even reroute the damn things. But also, there's a great deal of exaggeration. I mean, for instance, people say, well, it's sitting on top of some really important financial information or whatever. Yeah, but get real. I mean, what's going down that line? Stuff about shares. It is quite sensitive in the sense that a lot of companies now make a vast amount of money by being that millionth of a second quicker on doing a deal than the opposition. And we're talking fractions of seconds. And indeed, to avoid latency, very often these companies put their computer in the stock exchange, so there is no latency. If the Chinese get hold of that, well, by the time they've looked at it, it'll have gone and been acted on. I think we have to trust our security services. They are fully aware of this. I've talked to people who know about this sort of thing. It isn't a problem. Not nearly a problem as people think. And then the third thing is it's going to be a massive spy base. The Chinese spy, and they spy massively. It is true. But again, under the current sort of conditions of technology, you don't really want to spy from an embassy. There will be Ministry of State Security people inside that embassy, radaring around, making contacts, getting personality information, deciding whether X or Y might make a good target, for sure. But they're not going to be running I would be very surprised if they're running any of their sensitive operations out of that embassy, because it's a magnet for attention. It's much easier for the security services to concentrate on that, to bug it or whatever. Look at the communications going in and out. the Chinese run agents, for sure, but they'll do it in third countries, preferably, and they certainly won't do it from an embassy in any meaningful fashion. And it's probably easier for them to do it in 7 different buildings than one, if they were to use embassy premises. So again, I can't take that very, I'm not very worried about that. And finally, I think the other thing that people talk about a lot is, well, we've seen what they did in Manchester. They drag someone in and beat them up, and they'll you know, kidnap people on the streets and take them into the embassy. Well, they haven't done that since 1898 when they took Sun Yat-sen in. Are they going to do it? I don't think they are. But if they do, you won't want to take it to an embassy. That's where all the cameras are, the protesters will be, everything will be. You take someone to a safe house and then smuggle them out of the country as quick as you can. So I'm not unduly worried about the embassy. I think what does worry me about the embassy is that people are using it as a distraction from the very real problems of Chinese interference, espionage, etc., interference in our parliament or whatever it is. And we shouldn't be wasting energy on that, and politicians shouldn't be looking at that. They should be looking at the serious problems.
You probably can't answer this question, but I'd like to go back to the dominance, inverted commas, debate with Graham Smith's question, because he wants to ask you to do a bit of a comparison. So isn't China's wish to be self-sufficient similar to Trump's more bombastic utterances? So would you like to draw some distinctions between the threats involved by both those major powers?
Yeah.
Why are we comfortable with America and the way it behaves?
Well, let's we share an awful lot more than America in terms of our values and interests and trade and what they call people-to-people relations, etc., than we do with China. That I think is the first point. Trump and all that sail on her on one's, notwithstanding. The second thing to say is that we don't yet know where the American system is going and for how long it will go in the current direction, how far it will go in that current direction. There's considerable fight back within America in the way it's going, and they are allowed to fight back, incidentally, which they never would be in China. There's a difference in systems, we have the antithesis, if that's the right word, antipathy at times, between our system and the Chinese system is very different from between that and the American system. So let's see where America goes. If America goes and stays in the direction that seems quite worrying, then if you invite me back, I may be saying a different thing. But we don't know quite yet where America is going. And basically, they've certainly set off from pretty much the same position as us in terms of interests and values.
Language. As a classicist, I haven't got his name, as a classicist and one who has acquired a very high level of skill in the Chinese language, that's someone in the audience, do you think that the nature of the Chinese language helps to produce a different mindset to that of Westerners using an alphabetic system? And then I've got a follow-up question to that, if I can find it.
Well, my wife says that when I speak French, I gesticulate an awful lot. When I speak English, I'm sort of very English and restrained. And when I'm Chinese, I go Chinese. I think it's true that language does condition the way you think. Quite often when you're speaking Chinese and someone says, well, how do you translate that? And you think, well, I can't really. I know what it means, but I can't put it into English in a way that really encapsulates the information or the feeling that I'm getting from the Chinese language. So, yes, it does. I mean, again, I'll give you another very simple example. Chinese politics and propaganda is highly dependent upon slogans. It always has been. I mean, the Chinese language also lends itself to short, pithy phrases. They have these things, 4-character phrases, a bit like sort of in a sense, proverbs or sayings, but it's usually 4 characters. And they're political slogans. They can be 4 characters, actually, but they're short. And the Chinese will talk about, the 4 modernizations, and everybody knows what they are, or, the 2 establishes, or the 2 safeguards, or the 7 don't speaks. And I suppose this comes perhaps from a time when the people weren't educated and literate, back in the 20s, 30s, for instance. And if you're the Chinese, or the level of sophistication of language and reading wasn't that high, and you, as the party going from village to village, wanting to put out your message, you reduced it to slogans, which everybody then was able to absorb and knew what the background was. So it's a language that lends itself to that very lapidary sort of black and white, but at the same time, it's also a highly sophisticated language. And because I'm deviating, but let me just quickly deviate. I think the Chinese have a very similar sense of humor to us, actually. They like slapstick. I mean, if someone falls on banana skin, we all laugh, and the Chinese love that too. But they have a very sophisticated wordplay as well, because the language, with all the homophones and homonyms, it lends itself to ambiguity and fun, which makes it almost impossible as a foreigner to keep up.
English, just one more question on that, but it's quite different from Tony Howell. Are the Chinese going to learn to speak English as part of this dominance thing, or will we need to learn Mandarin? I mean, so is their end game that we're all speaking Mandarin? What do you think?
I mean, they quite understandably make quite a lot of efforts in trying to push Mandarin, but it is a very, very difficult language. And the thing about English is, it's a remarkably flexible language. I mean, you don't have to be very good at grammar in English to get your meaning across. Yes, our orthography is rather difficult. I mean, the spelling of it, foreigners tell me, is impossible. But orally, it's a very simple language. Chinese is grammatically very simple, but that's not where the complication comes in. And of course, the writing is fiendishly complicated. Even if you don't use the traditional complicated characters, you use the simplified ones. But if you do that, you cut yourself off from the old literature. So, very educated people would know both. So I don't see that, we have first mover advantage. Our empire stuck it all around the world. People use it. It's easy. It's flexible. You don't even have to spell it that well, actually, to make yourself understood. Whereas Chinese, no, it's an awful lot more difficult.
I'm going to stay broadly with education, but we're going to broaden out the discussion. I'll start off with Mary Potter's question. How does the Chinese education system produce so many top-class technologists? How could we emulate them? Let's go with that.
Gosh, you're pushing things onto me that I hadn't really thought about and perhaps should have done. Why do people... I mean, first of all, the government puts an awful lot of emphasis on science, as I think I may have explained. And therefore, it's encouraging people to go into learning that. Yeah, from the point of view of students and making choices to what you learn, that's where the jobs are going to be. That's where you're encouraged to go. That's where it's safer to go, actually. Science doesn't come with much politics involved, but you start writing a history essay or a literature essay, and it's not in line with the right Marxist thinking or Xi Jinping thought. History is a horribly sensitive subject in China, for instance. In 2013, a very interesting document number 9 on certain questions in the ideological sphere was leaked, and it talks about the Qi Bujiang, the 7 things you mustn't talk about. Or one is the Western system, economic system, the political system, the freedom of the media, the law, various other things. But one of them is what they call the crime of historical nihilism. and that is basically advancing historical authorities which go against the party's view of history. Because the party's view of history and how it developed and why it developed is part of its legitimacy. So if you look at history, even Qing history or Ming history, there's always the worry is that person making a covert comparison with today? Because actually, quite often they were. That's kind of dangerous. So maybe it's better to do sciences. I add that as a very minor reason, but I think it's sort of in state encouragement that probably means that so many people do that.
Staying with education, I've got sort of two areas here. You may choose between them if you don't want to answer them both. One's Jatinder Panu. This question, by the way, was discussed 2 days ago at the Keele debates in the theatre here. Some members were here, and you've had the details of them, that panel. Basically, the discussion was whether British universities are slipping down the league table. We have 10% of the top 500 universities, and the panel was asked in which direction the number was likely to go, down or up. And the majority thought that it's bound to go down. I mean, we're 10% of the best universities, we're 1% of the world population, so how could we aim for 15%? But Jatinder Panu's question is, with Chinese universities climbing global rankings, what can cash-strapped and politically bound Western universities do? Do you have much of a view about whether universities and education is part of the solution to what you've been discussing, the technology challenge?
Well, first of all, why might we drop down in terms of numbers? That's also a question of who's coming up. And when you go back to 1978, and all Chinese universities have been closed after the Cultural Revolution, they reopened, there's been massive devotion of resources, particularly because the party realizes that an educated, well-educated population means a strong economy. So they're coming up, and undoubtedly they are, which means that squeezing out perhaps our numbers. In the second element, so just remind me of the second question, because it was an interesting thought there, sorry. Like a goldfish, I can really only hold one thing in one mind for about 3 seconds.
Well, it's whether the British universities can respond to in terms of quality and success in the face of these rapidly expanding universities in a country like China.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm qualified to pontificate on the quality of British universities and how they can be better or not. I mean, it seemed to me that if I was in charge, but I'd need a big budget, I would make anyone who wanted to study STEM free, not have to take a loan, because I think that's really what we need more of. The other question, I suppose, which wasn't really asked, but I'll answer it anyway, was, well, you know, we have about 150,000 Chinese students in here. They're crucial to our university's financial well-being. What's going to happen there, given, as I say, there is a bifurcation, decoupling, in the sciences? Now, I'm less worried. I mean, there are two problems in terms of China and students in our universities. There are many advantages, but there are two problems. One is the interference in freedoms of speeches, and that tends to be on the humanities side. I think it's a serious problem, but I don't think it's nearly as serious a problem as how our universities have been, and still are actually, collaborating inappropriately, given that what Chinese sometimes get out of our universities is going to be ploughed into their military and their oppressive and surveillance systems. I think we've got to be very much more careful than we have been, and we are. I could wax lyrical in that, but then also the question will arise: well, if the Chinese are getting so good at universities, will they keep coming? 150,000 of them. Will Xi Jinping want them? I don't think Xi Jinping wants them to come. I mean, this is something that the middle classes, they want to go abroad and they want to study, particularly in the UK. I don't think he welcomes the fact that they study in, well, which countries mainly? The UK, America, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. I've just said the Five Eyes countries. So ideally, I think he would rather they didn't. That Chinese universities are just so good that they all studied there. Will he ban them? No. But there's certainly discouragement, I think, in party circles from going abroad. And the old days where an education abroad got you a better and a higher paid job back in China, no. No longer. And given the security atmosphere in China, the rise of national security and all the paranoia that goes with it, there's been a lot of discussion in China about whether, if you've got an education abroad, that disqualifies you from many jobs and adds an element of distrust, because the hostile forces, including the British Special Services, will no doubt have nobbled you. So I do think our university needs to think very carefully.
Right, well, just quickly, I'll give you the flavour of the questions about security in universities. Just give us any further quick thoughts that you think you might be able to add. Louis Daughter, how can universities help protect national sovereignty, prevent future dependence on China? Jessica Clinton, security and academia. How can universities ensure independence and security in the face of Chinese dominance in AI and chip manufacturing without falling behind? And David Taylor, should UK universities fear Chinese influence? And it's being talked about a lot, but are there any is it actually possible for people to be collaborating in science and doing work in universities like this one without leakage and sharing of ideas?
No, it isn't. It isn't impossible, but again, it's not, and it shouldn't be black and white. We cooperate, we don't cooperate. Clearly, there are areas where we simply shouldn't, and you know, you can reel off a number of those very early. I mean, some of the stuff that Imperial has been doing with automatic underwater boats is purely military. One of the people working with Chinese on rail guns. I'm sorry, but that is the latest form of ballistics. And if you've been working for the British government, as this person had for some years, in ballistics, you shouldn't be going to China and talking about rail guns. You really shouldn't. So there's some black areas, and then there's some white areas. But there'll be a lot of areas in the middle where it's difficult. And a judgment call has to be made. And yes, there will be certain areas of the security picture which aren't ideal. But on the other hand, you know, China's very good at science. We get things from them, and maybe the goods that come from this, leaving aside certain worries about the security side, but the other ones, whether it's in medical health or climate change or whatever, they're overwhelmingly good. So we'll accept some of the less good. So I know, I think the British government's been relatively good in setting up some of the measures to be more careful on this. I mean, there's a visa advanced technology, something, ATAS, I always forget what it is, what it stands for, but basically, you know, you're not meant to study certain subjects, and you're not meant to weed out those that come from organizations which have close links to the People's Liberation Army or to the security services or to inappropriate areas. And there's RCAT, the Research Collaboration Advisory Team, which goes around universities and gives good advice on where you can cooperate and where you can't. And there are a number of measures like that. So, as ever, do I think that they're got enough China experience, are well enough resourced? No, certainly not. But money is short. That's the science side. On the humanities side and the interference in freedom of speech, I mean, I do think this recent act should be implemented. I do think we've got to call out the Chinese whenever they interfere with our university's freedom, and people say, oh, well, it's not that bad, Charlie. And I say, okay, well, as a university, take the Dalai Lama test, invite him here next week and see what happens. And then tell me that there's no interference on campus. The long papers written on this, and I think we do need to call it out and stand up for it better than we do.
We'd quite like the Dalai Lama to come and speak to us. Do you know him?
I know people who know him very well,
Okay.
and I can certainly arrange that for you. And I want a seat in the front row.
Okay. I'm now going to put a question that the answer might lie with the rest of us rather than with you, but
Good.
I'd like you to comment on it. And it's also a bit of advertising for someone. Frances Bromley is here as a member, and she's a British manufacturer. She makes her ceramics in the potteries. And if the UK as a whole continues to import from cheaper sources and doesn't question the origin of goods, my manufacturers won't survive. How do we educate people to support British-made? And of course, this is, I suppose, in the context not just of lower cost of production, but also counterfeit and all sorts of other tricks that China is particularly adept at. Have you got any thoughts and ideas for British manufacturers?
Well, I've got a very personal interest in this. My wife is an illustrator and artist, and for as long as I can remember, she's worked for a company called Danone, which is based pretty close to here. And anyone who's got a Danone mug will almost certainly have one of my wife's designs. And you can buy them in China and Japan, and now we've seen them in New Zealand and God knows what. They're all over. So I have a personal interest in this. And I do take the point seriously. I personally will always try to buy something that's British, and if it's not British, I'll try and buy European, rather than Chinese, just as they will understandably want to buy Chinese. I think we should. But how you encourage that? I'm a sinologist. I can't give a definitive answer. Talk to the government, but I do think we should work hard on that. And as individuals, I will say to my children or my friends, but buy British, buy one of my wife's mugs.
Do you know anything about rare earths? Do you know anything about Greenland?
I know a little bit about these things.
Bodil Ashton, you see, this is the variety of questions we throw at the speakers here. So she wonders, when does China need to buy Greenland in order to have enough rare earth, and where does it get it from now? I thought they had lots of it, but do you? There's a tongue-in-cheek aspect to that question about Greenland, but. What do you see? How do you see them as predators?
Greenland's kind of irrelevant in this because I think the Chinese did have a couple of mines in Greenland, but they didn't work out. And frankly, the threat of the Chinese in Greenland is fantasy. But at one stage they were also looking actually at buying quite large chunks of Iceland. The Chinese. They didn't in the end that go through, but in terms of rare earths, I'd have to refresh my memory because there's heavy rare earths and lighter rare earths, etc. And China is busy going around. It has quite a lot of rare earths itself, of course, and it's busily making sure not just rare earths, but other forms of resources that it needs. Iron ore is a classic example because of the Samandu mine, which it's heavily invested in Guinea, in order not to be so reliant on the Australians. We don't like the Australians. They're the closest awful people, the Americans, and we Chinese don't like that. But the other thing about rare earths, of course, it's not just getting them, the ore or whatever, it's the processing of them, and that's where China controls. We can dig them up as much as we like, but if we can't process them or make those sorts of magnets, the special magnets that you need, using rare earths and other things, then you can have as much rare earth ore as you like, but you've got to be able to process it, and that's where we've got to build up the capabilities in conjunction with our allies, because there's no way that the UK is going to be able to do it on its own, and probably not Europe. The free and open countries, which is, I think, a better word than Western, because is Japan Western, India, Indonesia? Free and open countries need to work much more closely together.
Question from Roger Hartley, which could be the subject of a complete talk. Is China the answer to climate change or part of the problem? What's your perspective as you've studied all their technologies?
I mean, they certainly talk a good game, but at the same time, they're opening more coal power stations in a year than whatever. I can't remember what it is, but it's enormous. But at the same time, let's not be too hard on the Chinese. After all, we run down our manufacturing and the dirt that goes with it and exported it to China. China has made itself into the workshop of the world in that sense, the industrial base of the world, at very considerable cost, let me say, to its own environment. And as someone who lived in Beijing for 6 years, in 2011 and onwards, I smelt it every day. So I don't think we could be too hard on the Chinese. I think we have to work with the Chinese. At the same time, they're not going to give up. I mean, they realize that cheap, reliable energy and buckets of it, because data in particular uses far, far more than we ever needed in the past. They realize that if you don't have that, you ain't going to get to be dominant. And so in balancing up the ecology or the environment versus power, like all politicians, there are times when you think, actually, you're going for power, aren't you? And the other thing about politicians worldwide is you always tackle, or they always tackle, the problem that's immediately in front of them, rather than the one that's down the line. Well, we know the environment's really seriously. We'll come to that, but first we've got to be powerful. It's not a great deal different, actually, from the way our politicians work.
A couple of questions here that actually are quite opposite, but they all connect to one of the central themes of your talk. So Mark Dormer asks about decoupling, which is the word you use. To what extent is decoupling dependent on coordinated action being taken by the UK with its international partners? Is that possible, and how likely is that? So how can we become less dependent on them? Dominic Cox, on the other hand, says, as China's power grows, and there's an inevitability about it, would it not be beneficial for the UK as a middle power to have closer ties with the Chinese Communist Party as the US declines in influence? So do we get closer to them, or do we find friends and get further away? So would you like to sort of sum up your thoughts on that?
I mean, the first question, decoupling and unity with allies, for sure, because there's no way that any of these countries, ours, can do this on their own. It's just too resource intensive. So if you wish to, and I think should in many areas, decouple from China, because otherwise they will exploit those dependencies in the ways that I've talked about, then you have to work, or we have to work more closely with Europe and Japan and Korea and countries like that. I think there's, first of all, on the second sort of question, I wouldn't write off the United States. Of course, China likes to tell us that we and the United States and everyone else is going down the pan. America is pretty innovative, and yes, I don't think it's going through a particularly healthy patch at the moment. We'll see how that long that lasts. Nor would I overplay Chinese development. I mean, a year or two ago, there was a lot of talk about peak China. I don't like the phrase peak China because peaks go like that. I prefer to use the word plateau China, and I think we have reached plateau China. That, as I said during the talk, the economic system is unbalanced, uncoordinated, unsustainable, and it needs to be the opposite of those if you're to advance to the sort of superpowerdom that you will. So on that basis, I don't see China as becoming all-powerful unless we make many more mistakes than we already are making. And I certainly, if you want to get closer to the Communist Party, it doesn't come without very considerable linkages in terms of your policies, the way you behave. I mean, no, you don't invite the Dalai Lama if you wish to benefit from us and get closer to us. No, I think we've got to not get too close to what is a very, I'm sorry to say it, unpleasant political system.
Questions on, a very quick question about tech, but at the personal level, right? I've lost the question, but someone was asking whether you've got TikTok on your mobile phone and things like that, sort of Chinese-y type things that you might want to disclose a little bit about yourself.
I'm very happy, yeah.
And Chris Nibbs, he says, you know, we've seen the effect of Mossad pages and spying devices in our cars and our houses. So how can we protect ourselves without becoming hermits? And I suppose the point behind these questions is that we are being told to be worried about the threat of China sucking out all this personal data about us, whereas, of course, it's already happening, and Google and Facebook and all those billionaires in California are sucking the data out of us already. So, can you tell us about the threat at a personal level of China?
Yeah, let me make a personal confession. I don't own a smartphone, so I don't have TikTok. I have no Chinese apps, and I'm very careful to avoid them all. But in a sense, that's. But then, sort of moving on to the second question, you know, I think if I go out in the street and say to people, "Are you worried about the Chinese getting hold of your personal details and your you know, how big your bank balance is?" And the answer almost certainly is going to be no. I mean, I'd rather Google and others had it than the Chinese. But if you're not a government minister or in a sensitive government position or working for the intelligence services or you know, someone who might be vulnerable in some way, I think we should not be too worried. But if you are in those sorts of situations, then be assured that given some of the technologies that I've talked about, the Chinese can make a very, very, very detailed picture of you and your life. And if there's any vulnerabilities there, which they can exploit through blackmail or whatever, you know, you don't want to be opening yourself to that. But I think you know, when I talked about cellular modules and things generally, technology generally, I put data as number 3 of the threat. Yeah, it's a worry in specific situations, and indeed, you can aggregate vast amounts of data and make some quite important, dangerous tools, or whatever. But I think it's the third worry. I think the second worry is this, the press would call it this kill switch, but the ability to degrade or turn off. I just don't think a responsible government gives that ability to a hostile power. But the first worry is the dependency. The ability to use that leverage, and we've seen the Chinese use that leverage already, whether it's over rare earths or legacy chips, etc. And they will use it, and they will use that to our detriment, whether that's economic detriment or values detriment, etc., etc. So that's where I think we need to be much more careful.
I'd like to finish in quite a big area, which gives you a chance really to sort of sum up some of the thoughts that you have. And these questions are all about the durability and the survival of the Chinese regime that you have so eloquently explained to us. So I could just sort of read a few of them out, and then you might want to distill some thoughts as we close. So I'll start with Adrian Cartwright. Does the Chinese Communist Party contain the seeds of its own destruction, in which case how many years before they germinate? So another one, Glenn Warren. With such an emphasis for the Chinese on tech and decoupling, how problematic are the continual purges that we read about He doesn't mention the continual purges in the British government, but he's thinking of the ones in China. Linda Sherwood, will the Communist Party survive to its second millennium given the increasing globalization of the Chinese population in terms of foreign travel and education? And this one is Alistair Duncan. Contrary to the typical Western democracies, China, courtesy of the Communist Party, has the advantage of durability. Does that mean that they will inevitably succeed and dominate long term? And Tony Howell, does China have an Achilles heel? Please tell us what it is. So, survival of the regime.
Survival of the regime. Well, I guess my first reaction to that is, I talked about plateau China. Plateaus go along, sometimes they dribble off, sometimes they fall sharply. I don't expect the Chinese Communist Party to fall in the foreseeable future. It could, but I think for it to do so, there would have to be a catastrophic economic disaster. For instance, if they invaded, we haven't mentioned Taiwan. God, when we're near the end. But an invasion of Taiwan that doesn't work would be catastrophic to the global economy, whether it worked or not, actually. And that would be catastrophic to China. If there's a catastrophic economic in China, and there are splits in the leadership, probably as a result, then yes, the Communist Party could fall. But for all the purges that have been going on in the ranks of the Communist Party and the Central Commission for Discipline and Inspection, as God knows, I can't put it in my mind the number of people that have been disciplined or imprisoned in the last year, 10 years or more. It's enormous. But the party and the party leaders know that they stand or fall together. It came very close in 1989. They nearly fell. And if they'd fallen, what happens? Well, you don't go on the American lecture circuit and earn $50,000, $100,000 a pop. You probably get killed, and you certainly lose what you've got. That's a serious thing. So you stand and you fall together. We have a succession coming up at some stage when Xi Jinping eventually goes to meet Marx. What will happen? Well, he's made it much more difficult because so far he's accreted so much power at the expense of anyone else, and there's no immediate successor. And hitherto, bar the last one or two handovers of power, it's usually been pretty bloody in China, and there is that risk. But again, I don't think this is in a sense, a useful debate. If that happens and China falls apart, well, we may regret the passing of the Communist Party because we don't know what's going to come next. But it's not a basis for planning. We've got to plan on the basis that it's there and it's going to continue roughly in the direction that Xi Jinping has launched it in, which is increasingly, I call it a technological totalitarian system. My wife and one or two scholars actually would call it fascist. But that's the way it's going, and I think it will stay that way even if Xi Jinping drops off his perch tomorrow. So that's how we should plan. There were, and as I said, I'm a goldfish, so I've forgotten some of the other themes that other than the Achilles heel. Give me a prompt on...
Well, if you've got any further thoughts about survival, it's all about their survival and their ability to cope with all the purges.
Yeah, I mean, another point I would make on that is that with the downturn in the economy, dissatisfaction is rising. But the Chinese people put up with an awful lot more, what's the polite word, pressure than we would. And even if the pressure within the pressure cooker is getting bigger and bigger, well, nevertheless, the walls of the pressure cooker are getting thicker and thicker. The ability of a modern technological state to survey, to anticipate, not least through AI, knowing that or working out before you've even committed an offence or an act against a party that you might do, that you're the sort of person that would, and therefore requires more control and surveillance. The ability to control and then crack down, even if it gets to the stage of breaking out, I think that's vastly more than it was 10, 20, 15 years ago. So I think that the party will survive, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50
Despite
years.
the other question that was here, which you asked me to remind you of, and that was the possibility that the Chinese people themselves will become more educated, they will travel more, they'll connect more with other parts of the world, and presumably become more dissatisfied. Can any system, however authoritarian, suppress that? Would that, in your thinking, lead to any significant change in China as compared with this infighting and purging?
No, and not just because the tools of control are stronger. Actually, think about the depth of exposure when Chinese tourists tour en masse, which they usually do, and the exposure to conversations with you and me that might change their minds. And in even, sadly, I think many of the students that come and study here stay very much within their own bubble. This is what academics and foreign students tell me. So how much do they pull back? And then, the days when China might come and say, wow, look at the West, it's fantastic. Actually, they'd probably come and say, well, it's a bit dirty, and infrastructure, have you seen it? I mean, God, compared to what it's like down in Hangzhou or, even some minor county town, it's not much, is it? Well, what's it cracked out to be? I think I prefer my lot. So I don't honestly think that, and people are proud to be Chinese. They've got a lot to be proud of. They've got a lot of culture. The days of, the Western, it's great. I think that's gone. I just don't see that as a source of pressure within the pressure cooker.
We should be more humble.
You can't get enough of humble.
On that humble note, I'm going to draw things to a close. So if you all rush out into the car park and want to stamp on your smartphones in order to follow the guidance of our distinguished visitor, please feel free. But if you don't, I'm sure you'll still agree with me. This has been a fascinating evening, full of insights, different view of China, and whether you leave more fearful or more optimistic. I think we must thank our visitor, Charlie Parton, from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you, Charlie. Stand up and take it back.
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me there. It's been great. Thank you.